Now we get it. Cool. For the memento, or anyone else who didn't get to hear it. All right. So we're in John 21. So we've seen so far Jesus, the expert fisherman. Yet again, he's telling him to cast a net on the other side. This carpenter is unexpected, and yet Jesus is Lord over all creation, and he brings in this miraculous influx of fish into the nets. And so let's start in verse 14 of John 21. Read John 21:14 through 17. All right. And this was the third time that Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. This is that. All right, so 15. So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him again a second time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." All right, so three separate phrases. Well, Jesus is asking him the same thing, "Do you love me?" But his response to Peter's answer is slightly different each time. And so some translations will put it the same way. Some just say, "Feed my sheep" 3 times. There's a kind of nuance there in the language, and I want to discuss that. But we see the Lord is merciful. You might remember Peter just denied Jesus 3 times prior to his crucifixion, and prior to Jesus' crucifixion. And we see the Lord is merciful. He doesn't take him to task, but we see the Lord's forgiveness here. Note that if we are in Christ, the Lord refuses the punishment that we deserve. And again, Peter's a great example of this. Go back to John 18. John 18, we'll read verses 16 and 17 to start. This is just a remembrance of Peter's denial here. And he must have been wet because he was in denial. All right, so verses 16 and 17. All right, but Peter stood at the door outside. Then the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door, and brought Peter in. Then the servant girl who kept the door said to Peter, "You are not also one of the man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." And then skip down to verse 25. Now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, "You are not also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, that's Malchus, one of his relatives, said, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. And so, again, Jesus told Peter, before the rooster crows 3 times, you're going to deny me. Or before the rooster crows, there we go, you will deny me 3 times. There we go. That is doctrinally correct. But, so Peter did deny Jesus 3 times. And, we see the disciples, again, just didn't quite get it yet. And so Peter, again, he denies Jesus, but he sees the mercy of the King. So Jesus knew who Peter was and who he would be. And we see an emboldened Peter in Acts 2. If you remember Pentecost, he's proclaiming hope through Jesus to thousands and saw great results and a lot of fruit from that. And Jesus forgave Peter, and he showed him mercy. So let's go to the phraseology here where Jesus is discussing. In John 21, he first says, "Feed my lambs." And what he says here, little sheep, and literally just tiny lambs. The arnia is the word. And one way you could take that is saying that Jesus is saying, care for the little ones, and even possibly the little ones in the faith. And all 3 of these are 3 roles of a shepherd, and just kind of the nuances here. So feed my lambs, so take care of the little ones, the ones who are just coming into the fold. Also, he says, then tend to my sheep, and literally attend to the matters of those who are more mature, the sheep. And that's an issue of care, and the role of shepherd is kind of poimen, is to take care of and to watch over. So attend to the matters of those who are mature. And then we have feed my sheep, and kind of the interchangeability that you also need to feed those who are mature. Everyone has room to grow. So Jesus is saying just the different specific roles of what he wants Peter to do. And so just as Peter is a shepherd and was over a lot of people who were coming to know Jesus, that was one thing that he was told to do. And again, kind of parallel there with Matthew 28, and the only command there is make disciples and mature followers of Jesus. And I guess making disciples is kind of in there too. That disciples need to make disciples. The command is to us as well, and so we need to be making disciples of all nations, of all people groups. It's not just to one people. It's not just to two people. It's for everyone. So, cool. So that's kind of bound up in that passage. We see the mercy of the Lord and the commissioning of Peter. All right, so John 21, verses 18 through 23, we have another part of this chapter that's kind of key as well. So let's read that. Starting in verse 18. Most assuredly, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. This he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, Follow me. Then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following, who also had leaned on his breast at the supper, and said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, But Lord, what about this man? Jesus said to him, If I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Then this saying went out among the brethren that this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but if I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? So we see the important phrase here in this section, follow me. And we see that Jesus knew the end from the beginning, always does, always will. And he knew how Peter would die. He knew how John would die as well. Interesting with John, because we've studied that a little bit too, that John was brought to Patmos, which is this prison island, this island of exile, but he was attempted to be martyred. So people tried to martyr him, and he was boiled in oil, and yet he lived through it. So he was kind of like a Terminator, but one of the disciples who endured a lot and yet lived a long life, was able to write Revelation, and had a very long life. But a lot of the other disciples, they followed Jesus, and yet we see Peter here that he would be crucified as well, and not with Jesus, but much later down the road. And I guess tradition has it that he first saw his wife crucified, but he didn't want to be crucified the same way as Jesus because he didn't feel worthy. He thought it would have been a little bit blasphemous to do that, and so he was hung upside down and crucified upside down. So very, very painful, and man. But they died for what they believed in, and they followed Jesus, and they knew that. I guess one quote by Jim Elliot. Jim Elliot, if you remember, he was a missionary to South America, and a lot of people saw him. He was very young, and he wanted to preach Jesus to these people who hadn't heard of him. And so just zealous for evangelism, and you can read his journals. They've been published by his wife. And but one of the quotes that's kind of striking there is a lot of people saw his life and were like, man, what a waste. He had so many more years that he could have served the Lord, or he probably just went the wrong way. Maybe he wasn't following in the Lord's will. But one of his quotes, he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. And so the mentality there is, if that comes to be, if we come to a society where we have to either stand up for Jesus or keep our life, if it's a either or, we need to be faithful to Jesus. And so we live in a very open nation. It's very free, but then again, you think of like Columbine. You think of Rachel, that girl who gave her life because she would not deny Jesus. And so Just the issue of martyrdom there, that it's not necessarily something we need to run after, but if it's in our face, then we have to stand up for Jesus. So ultimately, the call there is follow me. And just thinking of the disciples, many of them just were totally martyred. It's not a glamorous thing, and following him doesn't make life easy. I think it makes it harder, and having to stand against so many ills that are in our culture today. We have to live counterculturally. We have to be just faithful to Jesus' teachings. We have to obey his commandments. And so I guess life isn't about who has the best hand, but it's about what we do with what we've been given, and being obedient to God through all of that. And if you think of the parable of the talents, one lesson we can take is some of us aren't gifted as much as others, or maybe we're gifted more in different areas, different from others. And so regardless of what we have, it's our duty, regardless of what we've been given, to develop those gifts and really bear fruit in those things where we've been blessed. But just in a parallel example, I guess a more sunshiny one, just thinking of the occupations of the disciples. We have Matthew, the tax collector. We have Judas, who has kind of questionable origins. He could have been a thief. He could have had a more noble type of thing, but a lot of them were fishermen. And yet we have the diversity of backgrounds and kind of the unexpected, the lowly careers, and yet they're speaking, very educated, knowing who Jesus was, and we see a lot of that in Acts. But the diversity of where God calls us in all seasons of life and all walks of life, and yet the common denominator there is our responsibility is to follow him. There's a similar call to this, and this was at the start of the ministry of the apostles. And Matthew 4:19, the similar call, follow me. And it's again as they're fishing. So similar setting. And you note the response of the disciples in that verse. I'll have you turn to the parallel passage if you turn to Luke 5:1-11. Matthew 4 is a very brief, abbreviated recounting of the same thing in Luke 5. So Luke 5 is a little more drawn out. Luke's a little more ornate, describing the exact call situation. But yeah, the response of the disciples, they immediately dropped everything to follow him. And the parallel passage, I'll read that for you. And Luke 5:1-11. It's a parallel passage. All right, so Luke 5. And it came to pass that as the people pressed upon him to hear the word of God, he stood up by the lake of Gennesaret and saw two ships standing by the lake, but the fishermen were gone out of them and were washing their nets. And he entered into one of the ships, which was Simon's, and asked him that he would thrust out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the people out of the ship. Now when he had left speaking, he said unto Simon, launch out into the deep, and let down your nets for a draught. And Simon answering said unto him, Master, we have toiled all the night, and we have taken nothing. Nevertheless, at thy word I will let down the net. And when they had this done, they enclosed a great multitude of fishes, and their net brake. And they beckoned unto their partners, which were in the other ship, that they should come and help them. And they came and filled both the ships, so that they began to sink. So imagine that. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he was astonished at all that were with him at the draught or drawing of the fish which they had taken. And so was also James and John and the sons of Zebedee, which were partners with Simon. And Jesus said unto Simon, Fear not, from henceforth thou shalt catch men. And when they had brought their ships to land, they forsook all and followed him. And so, in a lot of situations in life, we would gladly drop everything. But sometimes the Lord calls us to drop what is familiar or successful or stable to do something for him. And so a proper response to an encounter with God is literally to drop everything and follow him. So I guess the challenge there, will we run enthusiastically toward this, or will we just look at the challenge and quit or turn back? But we see the response of the apostles is they dropped everything and followed what they were successful at. And I guess despite this scenario, because they weren't so successful the previous night, but they lived as fishermen, and so they dropped everything that was familiar and yet followed him. Cool. I think that's the main thing. But we see the setting for the calling was a great place for preaching, and it was on the lake. And
parallel between the two, from beginning of the ministry and then here at the end of the ministry when he's out.
Yep.
Where they catch a lot of fish in the times.
And
Jesus under Jesus' authority, if you obey him, we got giant catches.
Yep. And they were obedient, and they saw good results from their obedience as well. Yeah. So there was a parallel between the start of their ministry and I guess Jesus' departure from them, not the end of their ministry, but kind of a commissioning, and then we see Acts, and then the start of the church. But again, you think of Jesus as a carpenter. It's kind of like a doctor versus a banker. Who are you going to want to operate on you? It's like, I guess, if the banker stayed at a Holiday Inn Express, maybe you could give him a little bit of latitude. No, but you want the doctor, of course, to operate on you. And yet, Jesus here was not the expert fisherman, but he knew where to put the net. And may have been something miraculous there, too. May have been some creation going on. All right. But just the main point of the message, Jesus told Simon Peter, one of his first things he said to him was, "Do not be afraid." In 5:10, and yet, what a comfort that would have been to the terrified disciple who had just seen the Lord of Lords and understood his sinful estate. It's kind of like Isaiah, when we encounter God and we realize our limitations, our sinfulness, and yet we can have the mercy through Jesus. We see Peter denying Jesus, and yet Jesus coming back, forgiving him, and the amazing way that the Lord used Peter throughout Acts was. It's just incredible. So, similarly, regardless of how you perceive you failed the Lord, or what sin is in your life, the call is still follow me and follow Jesus. And so, I guess putting that all in application, there's nothing you can do that's too great for God to forgive. And again, we need to drop everything. We need to follow him. We need to focus on the eternal, the unseen, and again, just follow him. And that's pretty much all I got. I would go through the whole Luke 5 endeavor, but we should close in prayer, because that's the main point. So, yeah, follow him. Let's pray.